I think we can all agree that Harper's branding instincts are outdated. That sentence cut through the air like a blade, sharp and deliberate. I didn't hear the rest of Liam's sentence because my ears were ringing. Around me, 24 heads slowly turned. Some glanced with confusion, others with awkward sympathy. A few smiled half smirks, the kind people wear when they're relieved. It's not them being humiliated. I sat frozen at the long conference table, gripping the edge of my notebook so tightly my knuckles turned white. I tried to process what had just happened, but the words hung there, echoing inside me like a verdict I never agreed to. Liam Caldwell, the company's golden boy and my direct supervisor, had just dismissed 7 years of my work with one calculated insult in front of the entire strategy team, our CEO, and the lead partners of Wexley, our biggest prospective client. He didn't even look at me when he said it. Instead, he flicked to the next slide in the pitch deck, seamlessly continuing the presentation like I hadn't just been gutted in front of my peers. This wasn't just about an opinion, it was a message. To me. To them. To everyone in the room, Harper Sloan doesn't matter. And I couldn't say anything. Not there, not yet. My voice was lodged somewhere behind my ribs, smothered by shock and humiliation. I felt my face flush, my heartbeat thunder in my ears. But I didn't let a single tear fall. Not in that room. I wouldn't give him that. I'd like to pause for a second and ask you something. Have you ever had your work, your voice, or your worth dismissed so publicly that it felt like you disappeared on the spot? If you have, leave a dot in the comments. You're not alone. And neither was I. Because what happened after that meeting? That's the part they never saw coming. I didn't start out invisible. When I first joined Vanta and Gray, I was 26, ambitious, optimistic, and completely certain that hard work would speak for itself. I had no industry connections, no mentor, no wealthy family name stitched onto my resume. Just a portfolio of campaigns I had poured my soul into during grad school, and the kind of work ethic that makes you the first to arrive and the last to leave. In the beginning, I believed in everything the company stood for. Bold brands, bold people. That's what the tagline said, and I wanted to be both. Liam Caldwell was the one who interviewed me. Back then, I saw him as the image of success, well-spoken, confident, always in control of the room. He asked questions like, what drives your creative decisions? And where do you see yourself in 5 years? And when I answered, I could tell he liked what he heard. Not because he smiled, but because he leaned forward and said, you'll do great here. We need people who think 10 steps ahead. I took that as a sign. So I worked hard, harder than anyone asked me to. I volunteered for the holiday campaigns no one wanted to handle, took client calls on Sundays, stayed up tweaking pitch decks for product lines I didn't even care about, and for a while, it seemed to be paying off. Until it wasn't. The first time it happened, it was small. A mood board I'd built from scratch was presented in a meeting by Liam. No credit, no mention. I figured it was a mistake, a miscommunication. It happens. I didn't say anything. But then it happened again. An email thread with a client where I'd soothed a major concern? Forwarded, cut, and cropped with Liam's reply at the top, taking full responsibility for de-escalating a sensitive situation. The turning point, though, wasn't a single moment. It was the slow accumulation of being sidelined. Being told, we'll let Liam take the lead on this one, or, you'll sit in, but let's keep it simple, you observe. My name was taken off decks I had written. My suggestions echoed back to me days later from someone else's mouth, and everyone nodded like it was brand new. And every time, I told myself the same thing. It's fine, stay patient, the right people will notice. But they didn't. Because in this industry, noticing isn't neutral, it's engineered, it's performed. And I wasn't performing. I was too busy doing the actual work. So I became silent. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had learned the cost of speaking up too early, or too loudly. I learned how to disappear in meetings without physically leaving. I learned how to draft an entire campaign and send it off, knowing someone else's name would appear in the newsletter announcing the win. And yet, I kept going. Because somewhere in me, I still believed that being indispensable mattered. That being good at my job would matter more than being seen. But silence has a weight. And one day, even the strongest shoulders begin to shake under it. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Nothing felt unusual at first, just another tightly scheduled day stacked with pitch prep, email chains, and back-to-back calls. I arrived at the office early, as always. My desk lamp buzzed to life in the quiet room, and the city skyline outside the window was still cloaked in a soft gray mist. I remember opening my inbox like I did every morning, expecting chaos, deadlines, maybe a last-minute briefing. Instead, I saw a subject line that froze me mid-sip of coffee. Wexley campaign, featured in AdScope. A team collaboration. I clicked. The article had just been published highlighting Vanta and Gray's recent award-winning pitch for Wexley's luxury skincare line. It was the campaign I had poured myself into for 3 months. Strategy, creative, brand architecture, audience psychology, every element had my fingerprints on it. But the byline? Creative vision led by Liam Caldwell, with key contributions from Ava Blake. Ava Blake, the assistant Liam hired 2 months ago, fresh out of undergrad, shadowing meetings and taking notes. She hadn't touched a single layer of that campaign, and everyone knew it. My name wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not even in the paragraph listing the team's efforts. For a long minute, I just sat there staring at the screen, blinking slowly. I felt something inside me start to twist. Not anger. Not yet. Just a kind of slow, quiet sinking. Like someone had pulled the air out of the room, and I hadn't noticed until now that I was choking on silence. Then my hand moved on its own, coffee mug in one hand, mouse in the other, scrolling, refreshing, double-checking. I opened the shared folder. I saw my initial drafts. My timelines. My annotated competitor reports, my mock-ups. All still there. And all apparently invisible. I stood up too fast and knocked over the coffee mug. It spilled across the desk in a dark, spreading pool. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I grabbed a paper towel, wiped it off in silence, and sat back down. I didn't cry. I didn't slam anything. That wasn't who I was. But something shifted. And once it shifted, it didn't shift back. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't an oversight or a miscommunication. It was intentional, deliberate, designed. Liam hadn't just erased my name, he had replaced it. And worse, he knew he could do it. Because I had never stopped him before. I stared at the headline again. Not out of shock anymore, but with a cold, clear stillness I hadn't felt in years. A team collaboration. Except it wasn't. And maybe it was time someone proved that. I didn't make a scene. There was no dramatic confrontation in the hallway, no email blast sent to the entire staff. No one even noticed that something inside me had cracked open. And that was exactly what I needed. I spent the rest of that week doing what I always did, showing up, sitting in meetings, taking notes, delivering results. But behind the calm, something else had begun. A second project. One no one could see. It started with a spreadsheet. Just names and numbers at first. Client contacts, dates, campaign titles. Then I added columns: who initiated the project, who led communication, who delivered final assets. I combed through my email archives, searching for any line where a client acknowledged my input. Every "thank you, Harper" became a data point. Every midnight email, every Sunday call, every voice memo saying, "I trust your instinct." I cataloged it all. Then I started saving everything. Every Slack message, every version history in our shared drives, every annotated draft where Liam had struck through my words only to present them later as his own. I created backups of backup drives. I exported call logs. I even downloaded the Wexley project folder just in case it quietly vanished one day. By the end of the second week, I had a digital trail so detailed it made me sick to look at, because it proved something I'd never wanted to believe. This wasn't just a bad pattern. It was a system, built on exploitation, polished by charm, and protected by my silence. That realization didn't crush me. It clarified me. And with that clarity came a plan. I set up a private cloud folder, locked with encryption, and labeled it something dull, like vendor assets. Inside, I organized everything by campaign, by year, by name. Then I created a single master document titled Client Relationship Attribution, Unofficial Internal Report. It wasn't for revenge. Not yet. It was for the truth. And for the day, someone finally asked for it. Around the same time, I started using a different tone in my emails with clients subtle but intentional. I included my direct number more often. I used phrases like, happy to support you personally, and feel free to reach out to me directly anytime. Most of them already had my contact saved, but now it was reinforced. Now it was strategic. I didn't ask for credit. I didn't correct anyone publicly, but I made sure the people who actually mattered the clients knew who was really solving their problems, and without realizing it, they began to reflect that truth back to me. Harper, thank you for jumping on this so fast. I'm not sure the others even knew what we needed. Do you think we could just route everything through you moving forward? You always get it. That's why we stay with Vanta. Those messages weren't just validation. They were leverage. Quiet leverage. The kind that doesn't shout but when used at the right moment, echoes loudly. And I was still waiting for that moment. I didn't know what it would look like yet. I didn't know when it would come. But I knew, when it did, I would be ready. The thing about being overlooked is, you start to notice others who've been overlooked, too. I had always assumed I was alone in this, carrying the weight of someone else's success on my back. But once I started paying attention, the patterns appeared everywhere. Quiet signs. A campaign that felt a little too polished to come from someone's first draft. An analytics report with Maya's signature formatting submitted under someone else's name. A pitch visual that screamed Elio's style, even though he wasn't listed on the team. It was in the silence. The knowing glances. The long pauses when someone asked, who came up with that idea again? I didn't go looking for allies. But they found me anyway. It started with Chris. We were the last two in the break room one night, half-empty mugs in hand, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a bad joke. He leaned against the counter and said, almost casually, "So, you saw the AdScope article, right?" I nodded. His voice dropped. "They gave the credit to Ava." Again. "Of course they did," I said quietly. Chris exhaled, slow and frustrated. "It's always like this. I've managed the same 4 accounts for 3 years, and guess who got invited to the Wexley Gala? Liam's assistant. Because he said she needed more client exposure." I didn't reply right away, but I could feel something shift. Like a door had creaked open. 2 days later, I sent Chris a message. Short and careful. Just, "Would you have 5 minutes after work? Something I'd like to run by you." He said yes. That evening, I showed him the first version of the master document I'd been building, only his section. Just his. Client names, email threads, performance reports, all tied directly to him. His eyes widened as he scrolled. "You've been tracking all this?" "Yes, for everyone, including me." He looked up slowly, then smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind you make when someone finally says out loud what you've been swallowing for years. I thought I was just being paranoid. "Oh, you weren't." A few days later, Elio joined us. Then Maya. Each conversation started the same way, cautiously, with hesitancy, but always ended with a quiet kind of relief. Maya, especially, took her time. She'd been burned before. She'd once reported credit misattribution to HR, only to have it dismissed as collaborative overlap. But when I pulled up the internal draft history of the analytics system she designed, then showed her the final deck that had been presented at the boardroom under someone else's name, she didn't speak for almost a minute. "Finally," she said. "I stopped hoping anyone would care." "I care," I told her. "And we're not fixing it with complaints. We're documenting, quietly, until the moment matters. We didn't form a club. There were no secret meetings or whispered plans. Just a shared understanding. We had the receipts now. And we were done playing invisible. That was the power of it. Not rage. Not revenge. Just truth gathered patiently in the dark, waiting for the right light to expose it. Some moments change everything. For me, it was a voicemail. Just 19 seconds long. It came from Miranda Graves, our CEO, a woman I had spoken to exactly 3 times in 7 years. The kind of executive who moved through the office like a shadow behind glass, visible but untouchable. Her voice was brisk, but there was a strange tightness behind it. Harper, I just had a call from Wexley's global director. They specifically requested you as the brand lead for the next phase. That's a strong ask. Let's talk. I must have replayed it 5 times just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. They requested me. By name. The same client I'd pitched, prepped, and coached through months of rebranding turmoil, the same client Liam had always referred to as his most challenging relationship. They hadn't gone through him. They hadn't asked for a strategy team. They wanted me. For the first time in years, I felt my body exhale. It didn't last long. By noon, I got a meeting invite. Subject: Wexley, next steps. Organizer, Liam Caldwell. I clicked it open. On the agenda: client alignment, team assignments, campaign rollout. My name wasn't mentioned once. I blinked. Refreshed the screen. Checked again. Still nothing. 10 minutes later, Chris forwarded me an internal thread. It was between Liam and Miranda. Liam: thanks for the update. I'll lead the next stage with Ava as junior support. Harper's skill set is better suited to back-end research. We'll pull her in if needed. Miranda's reply: copy that. I sat still for a long time. Not angry, just stunned. It wasn't just that they erased me. It's that they erased me after I'd finally been seen. A client had spoken up. Loudly, clearly. And still, they tried to fold me back into the shadows like nothing had happened. But this time, I didn't just sit there. I opened a new email. Addressed it directly to Miranda. Subject: Wexley assignment. Clarification needed. I typed only one sentence. I believe you deserve to hear the full context before finalizing that decision. I hit send. Then I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding not from fear but from a kind of quiet certainty. This was the moment. Not the end. Not the explosion. Just the first crack in a very polished wall. And I want to ask you something right now, because maybe you've been here, too. What would you do if someone deliberately shut the door on your opportunity? Even after the truth had come out. Would you stay silent again? Or would you find a way to speak? Leave your thoughts in the comments because your voice might be the one that helps someone else keep theirs. Miranda's assistant called me the next morning. Her voice was neutral, professional. Miss Graves would like to speak with you privately. 15 minutes. Floor 36. There was no subject line, no agenda. Just a calendar block and a room number. The highest floor in the building, the one with the mirrored elevator and carpet that doesn't make a sound when you walk. I'd never been summoned like that before. When I stepped off the elevator, the office was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet you only notice when it wraps around you, heavy and expectant. Miranda's assistant met me at the door, nodded, and gestured toward the glass conference room at the end of the corridor. Miranda Graves stood by the window, one hand resting on the sill, her other hand holding a manila folder. She didn't look up when I entered, but said evenly, "Close the door, please." I did. She turned, finally meeting my eyes. No smile, no small talk. "I've spent the past hour reviewing your file," she said, tapping the folder once with her index finger. "But I don't think this is just about files, is it?" "No," I replied. "It's not." She motioned to the seat across from her. I sat. There was a pause of 10 seconds, maybe less, but long enough to feel like a test. Then she asked, "How long has this been happening?" I didn't answer immediately. Because what do you even say to that? 7 years? Since the beginning? Since the moment I thought loyalty would protect me? Too long, I said simply. Miranda opened the folder and pulled out a printed email. One I had sent her the night before, then another. Client praise. Internal notes. Performance stats. My contributions evident, traceable, undeniable. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Her tone wasn't accusatory. If anything, it was curious. Quiet. Almost regretful. I met her Gaza. Calm, steady. Because for a long time, I thought silence would keep me safe. That being the one who just got things done was enough. And now? Now I realize that silence is what Liam counted on. That the longer I stayed quiet, the more invisible I became even as I carried the weight of his success. Oh, she leaned back in her chair, lips pressed into a thin line. I've worked with Liam for over a decade, she said. He's confident, polished, and persuasive. But this, she tapped the folder again, this changes things. She paused, then asked, "What are you asking for, Harper?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to get it right. I'm not asking for a title, I said. I'm asking for recognition, for transparency, for a system that doesn't reward charisma at the expense of contribution. Miranda folded her arms. You want a restructuring. I want accountability. She was quiet again. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right, she said. Let's see what that might look like. The boardroom on the 42nd floor didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a luxury showroom, glass walls, dark wood, polished chrome, and a panoramic view of Manhattan that made even the most seasoned executives pause. But today, that room wasn't about skyline aesthetics. It was about truth. There were 10 people seated when I entered, 8 board members, Miranda at the head of the table, and beside her, Liam. He didn't look at me. Miranda stood as I approached and gestured toward the screen behind me. Miss Sloan has requested an opportunity to present a proposed restructuring to our client services model. We've agreed to hear her out. I nodded, connecting my laptop. My hands didn't shake. Not because I wasn't nervous. I was, but because something stronger had taken over. Clarity. Purpose. I began with a simple slide. White background. 2 lines of text. What clients see versus what we report. I took a breath and spoke. For the past 7 years, I've been part of a system that rewards image over contribution. A system that assumes the loudest voice in the room is the most valuable, while those who do the day-to-day labor remain unrecognized. I clicked to the next slide, a side-by-side comparison of internal client manager titles versus actual client correspondence logs. Here's what our data says. Over 70% of our highest value clients maintain their direct relationships not with the listed account directors but with the support staff behind them. Coordinators, strategists, analysts. Names that never make it to the quarterly review slides. Some of the board members leaned forward. I continued methodically, calmly presenting case studies, client feedback, response times, and satisfaction scores. I showed the disconnect, the bottlenecks, the missed opportunities caused by vanity structures. I spoke without blame, just facts. Then came the final piece. I've provided each of you with a folder, I said, motioning to the stack Miranda had distributed minutes earlier, containing direct statements from 12 of our top accounts. In their words, not mine, they describe who they actually rely on. There was silence as papers were opened. I watched faces shift, eyebrows raise, jaws tighten. I didn't speak during that part. I let the evidence breathe. When they finished reading, I said one last thing. This isn't about replacing anyone. It's about aligning our internal reality with the truth our clients already live in. If we want retention, transparency, and growth, we need to build systems that value actual contribution, not just perceived leadership. Then I sat down. Liam stood next, clicking to his own slide deck, already loaded on the backup screen. He began smoothly acknowledging the validity of my concerns, but reframing the situation. Yes, relationship management is important, he said. But client acquisition is the engine of growth. We need visionaries to lead and support teams to execute. That's how modern agencies operate. His tone was composed, his posture flawless. To the untrained eye, he looked gracious, even collaborative. But I knew better, and so did Miranda. When he finished, the board thanked us both and asked us to step out for deliberation. We walked out together, though neither of us spoke. He stood by the glass railing, pretending to admire the view. After a moment, he muttered, "Nothing personal, it's just business." I looked at him and said quietly, "That's the problem, Liam. For you, it's never been personal. For the rest of yous, it always is." And then the door opened. The boardroom was quieter than before. When Miranda opened the door and gestured us back in, the tension in the air had changed. It wasn't sharp or hostile, it was heavy, like something had shifted beneath the surface. Like the floor hadn't moved, but gravity had. I stepped inside first, then Liam. The board members were seated, hands folded, papers neatly stacked in front of them. But their expressions weren't neutral anymore. They were alert, measured, focused. Chairwoman Evelyn Marks, who had barely spoken during the presentations, was the first to address us. "Thank you both for your candor and professionalism," she began, voice calm but deliberate. "This discussion has revealed operational blind spots we can no longer afford to ignore." She turned slightly toward me. "Miss Sloan, your documentation of client interactions is both compelling and concerning. It reveals a disparity between how this company assigns credit and who actually earns it." I said nothing, just listened. "Mr. Caldwell," she continued, turning to Liam, "your argument regarding acquisition and leadership has merit. However, your model assumes a linear process zone that no longer reflects how value is created inside this organization." Her tone wasn't angry. It was surgical. Miranda picked up from there. "We've decided to implement a modified version of Harper's proposed restructuring, effective immediately," she said, her voice steady, decisive. "A new department, Strategic Client Experience, will be created, reporting directly to the executive team. A pause. Harper will lead it." For a moment, I didn't quite process what she said. My ears caught the words, but my brain hesitated. Then Liam shifted beside me. I heard the small exhale through his nose. Controlled, measured, but unmistakably tight. "The department will oversee all major accounts," Miranda continued, "with clear attribution protocols and compensation aligned to actual client interaction, not titles. Additionally, we'll begin a full audit of relationship management across the company. This will include internal documentation, client feedback, and delivery accountability." She looked toward Liam. "Mr. Caldwell, your role will shift to new business development. You'll focus exclusively on prospecting and initial brand acquisition. Once accounts are onboarded, they'll transition to Harper's department for long-term management." It was clean, respectful. But the message underneath was clear: your era of unchecked control is over. Liam's jaw moved slightly. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply nodded once, curtly, and said, "Understood." Chairwoman Marks added one final note. "We'll reconvene in 90 days to assess the effectiveness of this new structure. Until then, we expect full cooperation from both of you." I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." As we left the room, Miranda pulled me aside near the elevator. "We'll need to announce this company-wide today," she said. "It needs to come from leadership in our terms, not through rumor." I took a breath, steadying myself. "I can do that." She studied me for a second. "I'm sure you can." End of sent. Then she handed me a copy of the official announcement draft and walked back toward her office. I stood there alone for a moment, folder in hand, heartbeat finally settling as the weight of 7 years began to lift from my shoulders. This wasn't revenge. This was a beginning. The email went out at 4:07 p.m. Company-wide. Subject line: Leadership Announcement and Strategic Client Transition Plan. Samuel Ray. Within seconds, the office buzzed, messages pinging, whispered conversations in corners, eyes darting toward my desk and then quickly away. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet, like the moment after a long-held breath is finally released. I stood at the front of the largest conference room that afternoon, beside Miranda, as she outlined the restructuring. Her delivery was polished and firm, shaped for clarity but cushioned with diplomacy. "This shift isn't about undoing what's been built," she said. "It's about evolving, about aligning credit with contribution, and building a structure that's transparent, sustainable, and fair." Then she turned to me. "I'd like to formally introduce Harper Sloan as our new Director of Strategic Client Experience." There was a brief moment of silence, too short to be awkward, too long to be meaningless. Then the clapping started. Some genuine, some slow and cautious, some not at all. I scanned the room. Elio looked stunned. Chris offered a small, proud nod. My arms cross-smiled, the kind that said, "Finally." Across the room, Liam sat with a rigid expression. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His new title, New Business Development Lead, wasn't mentioned out loud. No one asked. Miranda continued, introducing the second part of the announcement. Team leads. Elio Vance will head creative strategy. Maya Lin will lead analytics and insights. Chris Duncan will oversee client operations. One by one, the names of the people who had been working behind the scenes for years were brought to the front. A culture long dependent on silence was being rewritten in real time on company letterhead. The days that followed weren't easy. Some resisted, especially those who had thrived under the old system. There were tense meetings, awkward transitions, moments when old habits tried to reassert themselves like muscle memory. 2 senior managers threatened to leave when asked to document their actual client interaction logs. One of them followed through. The other changed his mind after a major client emailed asking to continue working directly with his associate instead. But most people adapted. And for those who had waited quietly, who had pushed pixels and data and proposals behind the curtain, the shift was immediate. Their names began to appear in briefs. Their feedback was requested before presentations, not after. They were given ownership not as a reward, but as recognition. In our first department heads meeting, Maya sat at the table like she belonged there, which she did, and said, "This opportunity means everything. But if I'm honest, I'm terrified. What if I can't handle the pressure?" I looked at her and said, "You already have. You've been handling it for years. The only difference now is you get credit for it." End quote. That's what this was always about. Not a title, not power, but truth. A system where contribution mattered more than charisma. Where teamwork wasn't a marketing word, it was real. And slowly, that truth began to ripple outward, not as a revolution, but as a quiet redefinition of how we worked, how we led, and how we valued one another. I didn't expect Liam to knock on my office door. 3 weeks had passed since the restructuring took effect. The office was still adjusting, new workflows, new leadership charts, new conversations. But for the most part, people were beginning to move with more clarity, less fear. Something unspoken had loosened. But Liam, had gone quiet. We passed each other in the hall, sometimes, polite nods, nothing more. He kept to the glass-walled office, now assigned to business development, buried in prospecting lists and introductory decks. I heard whispers that he was struggling. Not dramatically but noticeably. The kind of struggle that doesn't make noise but leaves dents. So when he appeared in my doorway late one afternoon, his silhouette backlit by the fading sun, I was caught off guard. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. I looked up from my laptop. "Sure." He stepped inside. No folder in hand. No slide deck. Just him. "This isn't working," he said, before I could say anything. His voice wasn't defensive, just tired. I closed the screen. "What part?" "All of it," he exhaled. "I'm used to working with a team. With people prepping visuals, running the numbers, giving me something to work from. Now, I'm chasing leads and getting nothing back. I don't have the materials I need." I leaned back, listening. Not unkindly, not triumphantly, just present. "I can't pitch like this," he continued. I don't know how to build from scratch the way your people do. I sniffed. I paused, then asked, "Do you know what that sounds like?" He raised an eyebrow. "It sounds like the first time you've admitted they were more than support staff." He looked down. "For once, no comeback." I folded my hands. "We all need support, Liam. That's why we're building teams instead of pyramids." He let out a dry laugh. "Fair enough." I really studied him for the first time in years. He looked smaller, not in stature, but in presence. Less armor, more reality. There was something human there now that hadn't been allowed to show before. "So," he said, cautiously, "will you assign someone to help me?" "No," I said. "But I will ask our creative and analytics leads to collaborate with you, properly credited, of course." He blinked. "That works. You'll be looped into tomorrow's brief for the Lawden account," I added. "Your role will be defined, so will everyone else's." He nodded slowly. "Thanks." As he stood to leave, he paused. "I wasn't expecting this to happen," he admitted. "What? Being held accountable?" "No," he said quietly, realizing how much I'd been leaning on other people's brilliance. That stuck with me long after he left. Later that night, I saw his name pop up in the prep doc for the Lawden pitch right alongside Elio and Maya's. Not above, not hidden, just equal. And for the first time since the shift, I wondered if maybe this wasn't just a story about tearing something down. Maybe it was about helping someone rebuild. Even someone you once had every reason to walk away from. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the same conference room where it all began. The walls were the same. The long mahogany table. The too bright lighting. But everything else had changed. I looked out at the room, not just board members this time, but team leads, department heads, even junior staff invited to observe. People who had once sat in silence now sat with purpose. They weren't afraid to be seen anymore. And I wasn't afraid to stand here. We were announcing record-breaking retention numbers, a 34% increase in client satisfaction, and the onboarding of 3 new major accounts all under the new structure. I had my talking points, my charts. But I put them aside. Because what I really wanted to share wasn't on a slide. 1 year ago, I said, I sat in this room convinced that the only way to survive was to stay small. To be quiet. To do good work and hope someone would notice. I glanced toward Miranda. She smiled softly, but didn't interrupt. And for a long time, I thought that was enough. But recognition doesn't come from silence. It comes from truth. And truth doesn't always speak loudly, it speaks consistently. I looked across the room. Maya was nodding, arms folded. Chris had his notebook open, as usual. Elio caught my eye and gave the smallest of smiles. Even Liam, now seated with the business development team, was listening. Fully, honestly. This company didn't just change leadership, I continued. It changed how we measure value. It stopped rewarding performance for show and started rewarding substance. Collaboration. Accountability. A beat passed. And what we've learned is this. When people are seen, really seen, they don't just work harder, they build things that last. There was a stillness in the room that only comes from recognition. Not applause, not noise, just presence. And then the questions started. Curious, challenging, thoughtful. About expansion, about scale, about replicating the model in other offices. We answered them all. Clearly. Together. Later that evening, as the office emptied and city lights flickered on outside, I sat by the window of my own office on. I had once passed by thinking I'd never belong there. Miranda stepped in quietly. The board's impressed. They want to elevate your role, Chief Client Officer. Full executive privileges. I didn't respond right away. I just looked out at the skyline, thinking not about titles, but about moments. Moments like a spilled coffee mug. A forwarded email. A voicemail from a client who saw me before my company did. Eventually, I nodded. Okay, but we keep the structure. We don't forget why it worked. She smiled. We won't. And hell, after she left, I sat in the quiet, letting the moment settle. Because the greatest form of revenge isn't power. It's building something so undeniable that the people who once dismissed you have no choice but to recognize you and then watching them thrive inside the system they tried to exclude you from. If you've ever felt invisible, if your work has ever been taken, twisted, or erased, please know this. You don't have to shout to be heard, but you do have to keep the receipts. If you've been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside, share your story in the comments. Your truth might be the spark someone else needs to keep going. Because the lesson isn't just about fighting back. It's about building forward.